You're listening to the BBC World Service. I'm Julian Marshall, and this is News Hour. Poland is poised for a radical change in political direction, one that will return it to a more cordial membership of the European Union. Although the Conservative Law and Justice Party won the most seats in elections in October, they lost their parliamentary majority and have been unable to form a governing coalition. And today, the party lost a confidence vote in Parliament. MPs then voted to make Donald Tusk Prime Minister. He's done the job before and is a former head of the European Council. His Civic coalition group came second in the election, but has secured a parliamentary majority by joining up with two smaller pro-EU parties. Let's hear first from our Eastern Europe correspondent, Sarah Rainsford. She has this report from the Polish capital.
There were cheers and jeers today in Warsaw as politics hit the big screen. As deputies gathered in Parliament for a confidence vote in the government, this crowd headed for the cinema to watch with buckets of popcorn.
I just saw that people want together, and I love to be part of the civil society, and I love to be a part of a change. So here we are watching government meeting in cinema, which is really absurd, but at the same time I feel we're kind of making history here.
Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki knew it was a vote he couldn't win. His populist Law and Justice Party lost its majority in the elections in October. But after 8 years in power, the government has been stringing out its departure. Now it's all over, and in the cinema they chanted goodbye. So Poland's preparing for the sequel, the return of Donald Tusk. The opposition leader ran Poland before, and now he's back, promising change. That includes ending years of fractious relations with Brussels. The EU has been holding back billions of euros in funding over reforms that it says threaten the rule of law. Donald Tusk says he'll address that as a priority. But major policy moves won't be easy. His coalition is broad, and the president has the power to veto laws. But public expectations of change are high, and this audience won't want to be disappointed.
Sarah Rainsford reporting from Warsaw. Well, on the line now, Alexander Wisniewska, a newly elected MP for Donald Tusk's Civic coalition party. And firstly, you must be pleased at today's votes in Parliament.
Good evening, Julian. Thank you very much for having me. Yes, absolutely. It was an absolutely historic moment, incredibly moving. We've sang the national anthem all together while swearing in Donald Tusk as the new Prime Minister of Poland. So we've been incredibly pleased and really delighted as a civic society and as a new politician as well. I've been deeply moved to be able to be a part of this change.
What's it been like living in Poland for the last 8 years under the Conservative Law and Justice Party, speaking as an opposition politician?
Correct. So, well, I myself, for the past 8 years, actually, I've been working abroad on humanitarian missions. However, I've been following the political situation in Poland very closely. And for the past 8 years, we had seen a dramatic democratic decline in Poland. Actually, according to the Freedom House Index, since 2020, Poland has not been considered a full democracy anymore, but a semi-consolidated democracy. And especially in the past last years of the Law and Justice ruled government, we had seen an extremely restrictive civil society, starting from the abortion law, with huge protests on the streets, with very strong alliance between the altar and the church, so the throne and the church as well, and also seeing increasing crackdown on the free media, with the publicly state-funded media being turned into a government propaganda tool, really.
But, I mean, you must be aware in trying to form a new administration and take Poland in another direction that Law and Justice continues to have a lot of support. After all, they did win most seats in those October elections.
Oh, absolutely so. However, we must take into account that in these October elections, so the 15th of October elections, we had a historic voter turnout. So we had 74 of voters eligible to vote going to vote, with extreme amounts of young people voting as well, which gives this current government of the pro-European parties, starting from the Civic coalition to the new left to the third wave, which are the three parties forming the new coalition government, a very strong mandate to rule. And we also have to take into account that immediately we had managed to form in the past 2 months, while awaiting a new government, we're already forming some first committees that will be dealing with the malevolence of the past government, and with some corruption scandals, with the issues that were gravely.
Okay, I don't want to interrupt you, but I do want to ask about, how you're going to govern, how you're going to create the kind of Poland that you would like. If you've still got a president who can veto legislation, you've still got a constitutional tribunal that is stacked with appointees of the Law and Justice Party who can again strike down legislation.
Absolutely. So this is one of the things that is, there's creating a public outrage, of course, and that has been one of the reasons that really managed to contribute to the fall of the Law and Justice government. So what they have been doing with making our constitutional tribunal and constitutional courts increasingly politicized, so filling them with political appointees and actually forcing the judges to apolitical neutral judges to retire. But we have just had a candidate for the minister, hopefully sworn in tomorrow as a Minister of Justice, Adam Bodnar. Dr. Adam Bodnar is a hugely respected gentleman who's a law professor and who's been the former ombudsman of civic rights. So I'm sure that he's going to run this change in a very extremely professional manner. Okay.
Just finally, you're obviously going to bring Poland back into the arms of the European Union, but I just was wondering about support for Ukraine. Is that likely to remain?
Correct. I think that currently, the support for the cause of Ukraine, really for what really is the Russia-West war rather than Russia-Ukraine war, is still tremendous in Poland. Of course, there are some technical issues remain, such as the issue of grain export, or the historical spectacular amount of gas from Ukraine that Poland has taken in, and that we obviously will be trying to accommodate with while minimizing any sort of anti-Ukrainian sentiments. But I'm convinced that continuing to support Ukraine in this war and continuing to lead, to have a leading role in the NATO Eastern flank will be critical for the new government.
Alexandra Wisniewska, a newly elected MP for Donald Tusk's Civil Coalition Party there. And that's it from this edition of News Hour. From me, Julian Marshall, and the rest of the team in London, goodbye.
This is the BBC World Service, finding out how young voters in Taiwan feel about the rising tension with China.
If China want to fight, I will fight back.
You have to think, how can I keep Taiwan safe?
They represent two sides of the debate. The nationalists keen for independence, and the more moderate figure seeking stability and compromise with China.
Taiwan's Balancing Act. Sunday at 14 GMT. Or listen now at bbcworldservice.com. In 30 minutes, Discovery with Adam Hart.
I'll be exploring our complex and challenging relationships with Earth's greatest predators through the people who have spent their lives tracking, protecting, and at times narrowly escaping them. Today on Tooth and Claw, it's the turn of the cheetah. Built for speed, we'll find out more about the fastest land animal in the world.
This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
On from our own correspondent after the news, 30 years after apartheid ended, is South Africa at peace with itself?
Democracy is deeply embedded. There's a vibrant free press and a robust judiciary. What they fight is corruption, a grasping, gorging and clawing monster.
Life in captivity for the children Islamic State left behind.
It could almost be a school. But there are armed guards patrolling the roof, preventing the boys from breaking out, and IS militants from breaking in.
And the cold, hard facts frustrating Germany's green energy goals.
They calculated how much they would have to pay to install a heat pump. The estimate was around €45,000. almost their entire annual income.
That's all coming up on From Our Own Correspondent with me, Pascal Harter, after this bulletin of BBC World News. Hello, I'm Moira Alderson with the BBC News. Addressing a US military audience in Washington, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has made an impassioned appeal for continued support in the fight against Russia's invasion of his country. Mr. Zelensky rebuked Republicans in Congress for stopping an aid package submitted by President Joe Biden, a move he said that was being cheered by the Russian president. Shungai Nyoke is in Washington.
President Zelensky arrived in Washington to present his case for additional funding. In an address to military officials, he argued that Ukraine is not fighting just for its own freedom, but for global democracy, and warned that Putin would not be satisfied with taking over Ukraine. Tomorrow, Mr. Zelensky is expected to make the same pitch to the Senate, where a test vote on the Ukraine package failed last week. He will also meet with the House Speaker Mike Johnson, one of the Republican leaders pushing to tie the aid package to domestic border security funding. It's a significant moment for Ukraine, whose offensive against Russia has stalled. He's hoping the face-to-face meetings will sway Republicans before the current funding runs out at the end of the year.
Polish legislators have given the head of a pro-European Union coalition, Donald Tusk, the mandate to form a new government. As Prime Minister-designate, he'll submit a list of ministers to Parliament on Tuesday. He's expected to win a vote of confidence. From Warsaw, Adam Easton reports.
Coalition MPs chanted Donald Tusk's name and sang the national anthem after the vote. But there was rancour on the opposite side of the House. Lauren Justice Party leader Jarosław Kaczyński took to the podium to brand Mr Tusk a German agent. Mr Tusk's pro-EU coalition plans to improve relations with Berlin and unblock more than 35 billion euros in EU recovery funds. To do that, Mr Tusk must undo some of the outgoing government's controversial reform that Brussels says has undermined the independence of the judiciary.
Adam Easton reporting. The spokeswoman for Russia's most prominent opposition figure, Alexei Navalny, has warned that his lawyers no longer know where he's being held in the Russian prison system, adding that Mr Navalny had not been in touch with his team for 6 days. Danny Eberhardt has more details.
Alexei Navalny has been in Russian detention continuously for nearly 3 years. He was arrested immediately upon returning from Germany, where he was treated after being poisoned in Siberia with a nerve agent. He's faced ever tougher conditions, held for long periods in isolation. His spokeswoman, Kiri Yarmish, now says his lawyers have been told he isn't in either the maximum security jail where he was transferred last year, nor at another prison in the same region. She said they'd had no contact from Mr Navalny for 6 days. The White House says it's deeply concerned about the reports.
World News from the BBC. As fierce fighting continues in Gaza, the Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant has said that Hamas fighting units in the north of the enclave are on the verge of being dismantled. Mr Gallant called on Hamas commanders to surrender or be killed. The Health Ministry in Gaza has said that more than 18,200 Palestinians have been killed in the conflict so far, while Israel announced that more than 100 of its soldiers have been killed. The Lebanese state news agency says that the mayor of a village in the south of the country has been killed by an Israeli shell. Hussein Mansour is reported to have been killed in his home in the village of Taibe, just a few kilometres from the border. European and US delegates at the COP28 climate summit have expressed disappointment at a draft of the final deal, saying it's not tough enough on fossil fuels. The Spanish ecology minister, Teresa Ribera, said there were aspects of the deal that were completely unacceptable.
It's not clear at all how we can proceed in these critical decades. And we think that it could be good to have clarity if we really want to make out of this COP what the world needs, and to make out of this COP what it was supposed to be, a turning point in our climate fight.
The draft text endorses a major reduction in fossil fuel use, but does not call for their phasing out. The head of the talks, Sultan Al-Jaber, called on delegates to work harder to reach agreement in areas where gaps still remain between nations. Major oil producers at the talks rejected proposals to phase out fossil fuels. The government of Greece has announced that football matches will be played without spectators for 2 months.
following violent clashes between rival groups of fans. It follows serious clashes in Athens last week that resulted in one police officer being critically injured. That's the latest. BBC News.